The hardest thing about being an artist is returning to being a kid and letting yourself play. Because if you don't play, you're not letting that creativity breathe. You're not, I think that's where a lot of original ideas come from.
Welcome to the Flowing Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I'm the host and creator, RNS, and this is the first part of a two-part conversation with the amazing Phelan Harris. Phelan is an artist from the US who uses art to explore the concept of humanity. Through the use of mixed media, she creates images, most notably of werewolves or dog-headed people, who seem to be contained within unseen boxes. I had a great time talking to Phelan today, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation too. So, I'm going to start where I start with everybody, which is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
A little bit about myself. I always hate this question. I have a lot of interests, kind of very diverse. So I grew up in Mississippi, spent pretty much my entire life there, which as an artist, as a creative, always has either a lot of baggage or a lot of connotations that come with it. Mississippi is known for obviously not a whole lot of like world-changing, life-shattering things, but it's the birthplace of things like the blues, and you've got William Faulkner and Eudora Welty and stuff like that. And that's, as far as the arts goes, what people think of. So growing up in Mississippi taught me to sort of value my own personal creative process, and influence obviously a lot of things that I'm interested in. It's very rural, it's very green. So I've always been really into nature. So I've spent my entire life. I don't really remember a time when I wasn't identified as an artist in some way. Like as a kid, I was always doing watercolors. It was just sort of just like a way of life. I was always in art programs. I was that kid. I was always working on something or learning how to do something. So like if I wasn't drawing or painting, I was probably playing with oven baked clay and was making little things out of tinfoil and just kind of always fidgeting, kind of always making a mess somewhere in the house. God bless my parents. There was a brief moment where I wasn't completely sure that I wanted to be an artist professionally. Everybody has that moment. Mine came when I was in like 7th grade. I got that out of the way really quickly. I had a wonderful high school art teacher named Denny St. John, who was a lot of students did not like her because she was difficult. She asked a lot of high school students, and so she asked a lot of me. But I actually really enjoyed the challenge, and I liked that she noticed that I took it seriously. She noticed that I cared, and I think she saw something worthwhile in me, which as a young person is always a huge deal to have anybody, a teacher, parent, friend, look at you and be like, oh yeah, no, you've got the spark, you can do this. But it always came with the caveat of, you have the spark, you have the ability, you have to work on it. You have to work for it. You have to want this. And she made that very clear to me. And being in a small school, a small town and stuff like that, like it always felt like I didn't have a lot of competition artistically. It was always sort of like, oh, you're the art kid in class. It was like graduating class of 75 kids. So it's like not a whole lot of diversity. So having somebody show up in my life and basically say, you're good, you're technically good, but if you really want this, you've got to put your back into it. You've got to do things you don't like. You've got to do projects you don't enjoy because you're not done yet. You have a lot to learn. And as a self-possessed, very stubborn kid, that was always so annoying to me and, really pushed my buttons. But I think that's kind of what made me stick with it. It was like, oh, you want to push me? You want to try to tell me what to do? Well, I'm going to push back a little bit and I'm going to see if I can actually do this and prove you wrong. Haha, I can pull this off. Which is always just a terrible thing to do to yourself, but it's a way of life at this point. So yeah, I started taking it seriously in high school, and it really has been my identity ever since, which is a scary thing to conflate your work with who you are as a person.
Hmm.
But it's kind of inevitable when your work is already so personal, you know, like your boundaries have to be with your time rather than your content or, stuff like that. Because especially as a creative, you're always absorbing things, you're always processing things. So yeah, I think I started to take it really seriously probably junior year of high school. And I had to decide if I wanted to pursue a BFA, which naturally my dad was very nervous about that. He was like, "Don't you want to maybe look at a business degree first or something like that?" And I was like, "Look, I get where you're coming from, but no, I want to. If I'm going to do this, I have to be all in. I have to be really committed." So, yeah, I kind of picked my path, I guess, early in life, and I haven't deviated from it yet. So that's where I'm at.
So that's really interesting. There's a lot of things you said there that I'm like, this is really fascinating. Like, especially when you said about like it's become your identity ever since. And I think that's kind of interesting to me because I have a lot of good art friends who are very similar, where it's not like they just do art, it's like they're not able to separate themselves from the art because it's just who they are. It's just like all they've ever known is all they've ever done is all they ever probably will do because it's hard for them to kind of be like, oh, I'm an artist without kind of being like, this is me, because their work is also personal. And I'm curious, this is probably a question for a lot later, but these never go in order, so I'm gonna ask you now. But like, do you ever worry or do you ever consider the fact that people might approach your work looking at the well, I guess, do you want people to approach your work looking at the artist or the imagery? Because I feel like they can sometimes be two separate things.
That is a very good question, actually. Especially with the werewolf series and work like that,
Hmm.
stuff that is already very personal. I think I am pretty much at peace with the idea of people conflating the work with me because it is rather representative of deep personal examination and experience. And so I'm okay with the conflation of the two because I like the idea of it sparking conversation that is meaningful
Hmm.
and like why on earth do you feel this way, or what on earth brought you to draw something so weird. And I think a little bit of that, you know a little bit of that shock value that comes with realizing that somebody else has got this deeply personal, difficult, and not necessarily comfortable experience behind the work is, really essential to experiencing the work at all and understanding it. So yeah, I'm really okay being with being so obviously a part of my work,
Hmm.
um, because I like the experiences that have created it are painful or uncomfortable, not fun, but I think it's incredibly vital as a society and as a community, on whatever scale you want to apply it to. It's incredibly vital to be able to talk about things like that, to be able to express things like grief and anger and fear because those are uncomfortable,
Hmm.
you know? I could compare it to how modern society handles death.
Yeah.
We putty up the face of the dearly departed, put them in a really expensive casket that we'll never see again, cover it with flowers and have all this fanfare and stuff like that. But we don't, there's not a whole lot of involvement in the ceremony of death. And so I think that's a really decent example of how we as a modern society handle difficult emotions and things that are really uncomfortable. And it's not to say that we should be just like spouting those difficult things all the time.
Hmm.
There's a time and a place. Um, and honestly, I'd really like to see that time and place be the gallery,
Hmm.
any gallery, like however big, however important, a museum, whatever, it doesn't matter, because art is such a wonderful distillation of the human experience that anybody can consume. And it can be life-changing. It can alter everything you think, if given the chance. So yeah, so I'm fine with being mixed up in that imagery. And
That's
if
really
people
cool.
want to separate the artist from it, that's fine too, because I think good art needs to be able to stand on its own feet. It shouldn't need me, but if it has me, that's fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good answer. That's a really good answer, actually. But I'm kind of curious, like, do you think that, I'm sorry, these are not even on the list, I do apologize, but do you think
That's
that
fine.
art can be too personal?
I don't think art can be too personal. I think people can conflate the idea of being brutally vulnerable with being honest, but just like you can be brutally honest with somebody, really you're being a jerk.
Hmm.
There's a level of sensitivity that comes with communication in all forms, be it, a conversation, be it visual artwork, be it music. Um, that sensitivity to the content you're handing somebody is integral to effectively communicating. So I have a really good example, actually, as far as being too personal, but not in a constructive way. So for a little while before I started doing my own personal art full time, more or less, I did several commissions via a website called Upwork. Super useful for freelancers, especially if you're young, you don't know what you're doing, but you can draw and you can draw anything. So you offer people $25 to draw them a picture of their cat or a logo or anything like that. So this guy wanted digital illustrations for a poetry book he was doing, and I was like, that's right up my alley. I love poetry and I love illustrations that go in books. This is perfect. So I took it on, and first time author, first time having his work published in any way, and I I learned about a terrible thing called scope creep, which is something that I don't remember being mentioned in any of my preparatory classes for graduation. Like that word did not get thrown around, but it happens a lot, and it's really easy to let a client take advantage of your time. And unfortunately, that's what I took away from this experience. On top of this particular writer, he wanted to delve into really dark subject matter. So, things like suicide and self-harm and, relationship abuse, things like that, that are all incredibly valid, incredibly important subjects to talk about and have in the public sphere, because everybody experiences it to some degree. Um, Nobody has a clean slate. It might look like you do. So
Yeah.
I took what he was giving me content wise, and I was like, okay, no, this is valid. It's one of my first illustration clients. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to draw. That was it. I was like, so I was very optimistic. I was like, I can work with this. We'll have conversations about it. We'll add some nuance to it. We'll, make something good with what we have. And he was asking me to draw very graphic images, and things like somebody holding a gun and just looking at it, literally contemplating suicide. And it was jarring at first, but I wasn't thrown off by it. It was like, no, this doesn't not deserve visuals. Like, this is a really hard subject matter that I'm not afraid to explore. Like, this could be a really good thing, even though it's hard and it's ugly. But it got to a point where I think he basically wanted an illustration of, I think it was just an abusive relationship. And I was like, you know what? I just like suddenly realized I don't feel good about this, because he was asking me to present this really difficult subject matter with no sensitivity. I got to a point where I was reading it, I was reading his poetry, and I was synthesizing the image to go along with it. And I kept thinking to myself, what is he doing with this? Like, what is the point of presenting this really difficult content without nuance, without any no personal background, nothing. There's nothing to connect with other than this is this is universally difficult and uncomfortable. And maybe for some people that's enough, But for me personally, if you are presenting something that has a lot of shock value and you're not actually exploring any deeper themes and you don't have a process to what you're creating, it kind of comes across as just, I want to freak people out.
Mm.
You know, if you're gonna delve into difficult themes out loud and share them with people, there has to be, I don't want to say there has to be a point because it's a really blunt way of putting it, but there has to be an avenue. There has to be a direction of flow that you want to guide people towards, because when you create work like that, you're inviting people into your world, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, it's very personal. And if you're just word vomiting your diary out there for people to read and examine, I don't know about you, but my diaries are chaos, and
Mm.
there's not a lot to glean from it. And I think there's a certain degree of guidance and refinement that is necessary for difficult subjects to be um, really shared in a community of art loving people or artists or whatever. You know, it's like having a theme to a quilt.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
as somebody who's really intimidated by quilt projects, it really helps to have a pattern. It helps to have organization to, you know, whatever diverse palette you're trying to apply to this thing. So yeah, you can't be too personal, but you can lack the finesse to present an idea well.
So you studied a BFA in art. So what are your thoughts on art education? And is it important for an artist to have a degree?
Is it important for an artist to have a degree? Absolutely not. And I say that with the caveat. I'm thinking about my dad in the back of my head right now. I think I must have said that to him maybe, I don't know if it was after I graduated from college or if it was when I was about to, but basically I said something to the effect of, I had realized that um, I could do the thing that I loved without having to go to school for it. Which is true for most things.
Mm.
If you're passionate enough about something and you're going to pour your time and your effort into it, you'll eventually see fruits. And if you want to turn it into a career, you can. Like you with this podcast,
Mm.
you put a lot of time and effort into it. You didn't have to go to school to do this.
Sure.
You can absolutely learn as you go. And that was not something I understood in high school. I had to get through college to realize, oh, like it's an important experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't have gone to a different school. I wouldn't have not done it by any means, because it opened up a lot of opportunities and introduced me to a lot of people, and definitely gave me experiences that I would not have otherwise had. Like right now, my ability to sit here and talk about this stuff could not do as a freshman in college. I was failing aesthetics papers because I just didn't realize that I didn't know how to articulate myself. I didn't realize that I didn't have a language for what I was doing to begin with. So, in that way, a college degree isn't about the piece of paper. It's most definitely about the opportunity to be exposed to things you otherwise wouldn't, regardless of field. Um, if let's see, I mean, if I had not gone to college and specifically focused on art and had been so hardcore about it and so committed and so weird about it, I can assure you this would not be my job today. Going to school, especially at the time, Belhaven University, it's a teeny tiny little school in the state capital of Mississippi. Most people have never heard of it, which is part of the magic of it. So, you know, a lot of my classes in school only had like 7 or 12 people in them,
Wow.
you know? And if it was like a class that was more focused on writing and essays and was just sort of a degree requirement, like aesthetics and art history, you know, it'd be a full classroom, the whole thing. But it was um, a very intimate program. So I had a ton of one-on-one time with all my professors. It I had a chance to connect with all of my peers, and it was really, like, it was difficult asking for feedback and looking for guidance because I didn't quite know how to do it yet. But being in that environment, I learned how to. I learned how to seek out critiques, and make sure that they were going to be effective. Um, and in large part due to learning how to talk about work. Um, it's like going into computer programming or something, and you show up at the office and you don't know how to talk about what you just worked on last night.
Mm.
Like how do you describe the code that you just entered into the program to create this effect or whatever? And if you don't have a language for that, you can't really participate. So when it comes to saying whether or not you need a degree, no, you don't need a degree. But I would encourage anybody who wanted to be a part of the arts in any way to, you know, I guess seek out avenues of growth, seek out places that are going to um, foster a really authentic artistic experience, which having not being in the academic world right now, I don't know how many places are really, really truly doing that. At the time, this little school I went to was, I mean, like, we were reading books like Art as Experience by Dewey, and The War of Art and things like that. So a lot of things that focused on the interior process of creativity
Mm.
in such a way that you can walk into a grocery store and be enchanted by the fruit aisle. You know,
Mm.
everywhere you go, there's an opportunity to understand something new. There's an opportunity to see the world in a brand new way, but you have to learn how to seek it. So you might be able to draw anything, but it's a lot harder to grow your creative process without that foundation of how to think about your process. So I wouldn't say you need a degree, but you need a community of more experienced peers to learn from. And I think that was one of the most valuable things I took away from getting a degree at all. Um, and it is nice to put a tagline somewhere on my CV and be like, yes, I have proof that I learned how to do this thing. Um, I have years of experience, and I learned under other professionals, and that's probably the biggest technical boon that I got from having a degree. Because at the time, especially getting a bachelor's in fine art was supposed to lead me into getting a master's in fine art, and it was a weird sequence of events. It just didn't happen. I applied to a school a couple times, and it was weird. One of my applications didn't go through or got lost. I can't really remember anymore. As you can see, it's not affecting my life anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and it just kind of, I was so busy living life and doing other things that it didn't work out, and I just forgot about it. And today, I don't really want an MFA. It
Mm.
wouldn't serve me unless it was a program that fostered that artistic community that I like so much about
Mm.
being in academia. Um, you're locked in a small room with a projector in front of all of you, and you're all incredibly invested in this thing that you've spent so much time reading about and spending money on materials for, and that sort of crazed monk seeking knowledge perspective is what I love about it. But I wouldn't necessarily want the entire degree. I just want to be there for the classes that I care about. So yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think a lot of people when I ask them the question, or just when I talk to them in general, is about the experience you get, not necessarily the education you get. Because I feel like at the end of the day, a lot of art degrees in any kind of creative course or creative, particularly like academic creative course, they don't teach you a lot of things you really should know, like especially like the business side of art. Like there's a lot they kind of conveniently miss out, I think. I feel like actually I think weird nice thing about this day, like it'd be really nice to get an idea of everything artists missed out on in terms of education, who artists who did degrees, and then make a course based on everything they missed out on. I think that would be really nice, actually. because it'd be nice to actually serve the next
Absolutely.
generation of artists and kind of be like, actually, these are things you actually need to know. I was thinking about this randomly. I should do. I don't know. Maybe hey, maybe at one point in my life I'll do that. I think it'd be cool. Um, that'd be a
That
nice
would
little
be
legacy.
amazing.
That'd be a nice little
Would
legacy,
take
and
a
it'd
bit
be
of effort.
helpful. And it'd be helpful, you know. And then I can invite
Mhm.
all the people I know to be lecturers, which would be perfect. Perfect. That'd be cool. Like a little.
Absolutely.
Because the one thing that I used to love, I did a photography degree like a long time ago. And
Mhm.
one thing I used to love is the visiting lecturers in terms of people coming in and telling about their work. And I feel like we need more of that. We need more people who actually are in the industry and or even who aren't even in the industry, who are just artists in general day life, to kind of show the next generation of artists like what it really is like and to be honest. Because no
Mhm.
one's ever really honest about, the struggle of being an artist.
That was one of the things that we did get in the program that I went to. I can't remember how many times, and I can't remember what class it was, but we had a couple of visiting artists come in, and some of them I completely forgot about, and that's no fault of their own. Um, you know, fickle college kid with lots of other things on my mind besides my studies. I didn't register everybody that came in, but there were a couple of artists who um, would do exactly what you're describing. There was a lady who flew in from Australia. She
Wow.
was stateside for whatever reason, and she was, I cannot remember her name. She was extremely colorful, eccentric, everything you would expect from an
Yeah.
artist. And she would she was basically just telling stories about her life, um, and how it fed into her art practice and stuff like that. And that really did have a huge impact. Another lady who made her living almost exclusively by doing art markets, which was crazy
Wow.
to me. And it's crazy
Yeah.
to me now too, especially, post 2020, which took a big bite out of, the time and the availability and the convenience of just
Mm.
packing up and doing markets. But she, you know, having somebody stand in front of you, somebody who's older, somebody who has stories both good and bad, telling you, here's what sucks, here's what makes me cry at night, here's why I'm still doing it.
Mm.
And those stories had quite an impact on me. Um, I think I think I think that is one of the parts that I like so much about a live in-person artistic community is basically swapping stories. It's what you want from any workplace.
Yes. That's true. So, what is the biggest challenge of being an artist?
Oh God. I actually had to write this one down. Um, ooh, out of all of the things that I listed, the thing that I feel like I've really come back to over the years many times, being disciplined is always a big thing. Being willing to get up early and stay up late just to complete the project that you care about. Especially if you're working another actual job besides trying to be a creative. Like that is very hard. And I've done that. I did that for a few years and it was absolutely draining. It was very difficult. But that's still not the hardest part. Um, and it's something that I could not have told my younger self to look out for or to work on until I got to where I am today. Actually fairly recently. So there is a workbook that a lot of creatives really enjoy. Gosh, what's it called? She's a very good author, and I was very skeptical before I started doing it. I think it's called The Artist's Way, and now I cannot remember the author's name. She also wrote a book called The Golden Thread, I think, but it's basically a workbook, um, pretty substantial, that guides you through different healthy practices that all creatives and honestly all people should be practicing. So, every morning you're supposed to, before you do anything else, before you have your coffee, before you take the dog on a walk, before you get out of bed, even grab your notebook and spend 30 minutes just word vomiting. Like, and I was really skeptical. I was like, God, 30 minutes of this every morning? You want me to just do you know what my brain sounds like at 6 a.m.? It's cacophonous. Like how can you ask somebody to do this? But in the process of doing that, you get a bunch of crap out of the way. Your mind is settled. You already know what's bothering you. And if you've taken the exercise seriously, you've already probably found a couple of avenues to solve what's bothering you, or at least to deal with it and things like that. So she had that. She had different exercises that you're supposed to do each week. I think it's sort of a 12-week program, and you can start it and stop it as many times as you want. I've done it twice now. And some of the things that she asks you to do are, take yourself on an artist date, whatever that looks like, however that fits your practice. By basically, treat your inner child, like let that part of yourself guide you to the kids' toy section at the dollar store and buy a pinwheel. I kid you not. I bought this absurd pen based on that prompt. And I don't buy frivolous things. I don't like chintzy stuff. I don't like plastic. I don't, if it's, especially the older I get, if it's biodegradable, that's fine. If it's not biodegradable, I really don't want to spend money on it because it's going to be there forever. And once it's in my possession, I'm responsible for it. But it gave me permission to do things that I enjoyed that weren't necessarily constructive. And to basically, and this was the thing that I couldn't teach my younger self until recently, to relearn how to access that deep creative state that only comes when you are fully invested in what you're doing. You've lost all inhibition. You're not self-conscious. You're not worrying about what something looks like. You're not worrying about whether or not what you're doing is a waste of time. And the best example I have of that was something that I used to do a lot in high school, and especially when I was a young kid. I would have a notebook on my nightstand, my little lamp, my little bedside, and I would be excited to go to bed because I knew I'd get to sit there and either write or draw uninterrupted for as many hours as I wanted. More valuable than I thought it was. And then I got older and didn't have time for that and needed real sleep like an adult. But there were a few nights where I would be awake at 2 or 3 a.m. Just awake, just couldn't fall asleep. I'm a teenager. My sleep schedule's messed up. Woe is me. But I have my notebook, so everything's okay. And I literally fell asleep writing a poem for class. It was for one of my literature classes in high school. Loved the teacher for that one too, because she was also extremely encouraging, very intentional with her students and things like that. Makes a huge difference. I wrote this poem, and I think it was supposed to be more or less about graduating high school, life-changing, like moving on from where you used to be and things like that. And that was the gist. Everybody write a poem. And so my 2 a.m. brain must have excreted something exceptionally good because she read it out loud to the class. And I'm sitting here holding my desk chair going like, I don't know what I wrote. I just was writing things. I was following my gut. I was having fun doing something and just, following my nose. And I think most people have seen this video by now. It's a TED Talk given by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about the creative process, and she uses an example, and I cannot remember the name of the artist. No, it's an author. It was a writer. I think it was a poet. And the example that she gives in her TED Talk so this writer had a practice. It didn't matter where she was, what she was doing, what was happening, how important it was. If she felt something coming, the creative force, the genius, the genie, whatever you want to call it, she referenced it as feeling like a freight train or a massive gust of wind is traveling across the landscape. And if she didn't make it to a pen and paper immediately, it would find somebody else to channel through. And when I first heard that, I was like, that's a little eccentric. That's like, I don't know if I've ever experienced that. And then I started paying closer attention to my process. And especially the older I've gotten and the deeper that I've connected with what works for me. Um, I have to have my sketchbook always. It doesn't matter where I'm going. We're going out to eat. I'm about to go get in bed. In case something shows up, because most of the time, being creative or being artistic, whatever, is not about, you know, sitting down at your desk and coming up with brilliant ideas every day. It's about leaving the door open for whatever is going to find you, whatever is intriguing to your senses, and you have to see what happens. You know, it's you creativity doesn't work if you're not willing to just play. You have to be willing to let go of everything, your expectations, what you want from yourself, whether or not rent is due, whether or not you got to go get groceries, whether or not the dog just peed in the living room again, because it happens. Um, you have to make a space within yourself and a little nook in the physical world to let things happen and not be a control freak and let the whole inner child thing actually just work itself out because you can't force it. So the hardest thing about being an artist is returning to being a kid and letting yourself play. Because if you don't play, you're not letting that creativity breathe. You're not, I think that's where a lot of original ideas come from is learning how to feed your intuition instead of, treating it like a horse that you're hooking up to the plow today. Like, all right, we got to get this done. If I don't, if something creative doesn't come out of this soil today, I'm a failure. Can't do that.
Mm.
And I used to be that way quite a lot, where if I wasn't doing something and it wasn't productive, like even in a creative way, it wasn't worthy of the time that I spent on it. Our most precious non-renewable resource
Yeah.
known to humanity is your time. And so learning to take that most valuable resource and hand it over to something you don't understand is very hard once you've grown up. Um, Once you've learned that you have a schedule, that you need to go to bed on time, that you need to eat X amount of protein this afternoon so that you're focused at your desk, and all these little things that are helpful and are important, but we get fixated on doing everything right.
Mm.
Um, and so a lot of that creative process falls by the wayside. And I couldn't have known that until I reached adulthood. It's just part of it, and it's annoying and it sucks. Sometimes it feels like I spent way too long not tapping into that, but I couldn't know what I know now, so it helps me not be angry at my younger self. Like, I didn't waste my time.
Mm.
I just had to do things the hard way, which is par for the course for me.
But that's the interesting thing though, that like you wouldn't have been able to get that information or that understanding when you were younger. That's the whole point. You had to be
Mhm.
older and you had to understand. You had to kind of relearn and re-figure stuff out and understand for you to know that. Like I think we
Yeah.
forget that all the answers aren't always available to us. I think getting older, especially, which is something I'm going to add, we have just added onto this very long list of questions somewhere near the bottom. But getting older is actually such a blessing, I think, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people are afraid of, or they kind of, definitely for myself for sure, I've always been a bit fearful of it. Until you get to a threshold and you just think, okay, I just don't really care anymore, because then you realize life's about living. It's not about waiting for the next thing. It's about doing something today, doing something you enjoy, having fun, as you said, playing, and kind of just like
Mhm.
realizing, actually, you know what, life is great now. You don't have to worry about what it's going to be like in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 10 years' time. So I
Yeah.
think basically when it comes to like art and creativity, like you can't predict where your career is going to be in a month's
Mhm.
time, let alone a year's time. So don't worry about it. Worry about what you can do today that is going to help you be the most productive for the next week or whatever. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, tapping into the present moment instead of getting overwhelmed by the past and the future, which are not in your control to begin with. Yeah. And, circling back to that whole playing like a kid, being creative like a kid. fully invested in the present moment. That's,
Yeah.
that's quite a bit of freedom to let yourself do that.
And also not being afraid to fail and just make stupid mistakes and kind of learn as you
Yes.
said, like earlier, like the hard way. Because kids, the best thing about kids is that they're so curious about everything and they don't really care what people think when they create stuff or when they make work or whatever. Like they're making
Mhm.
it not the problem is and this plays into social media, but the problem is that we live so much nowadays for other people's validation. We never really live for our own. And I think that's really a huge issue. Because like you might want to go and create something because you like it, not because a million other people are going to like it. It's like it's a tough situation, I think, for a creative because it's like you want to create work that people love, but at the same time,
Mhm.
like no one's going to love it the same way you love it as the person who creates it. So it's like
Yeah.
a hard balance to find out. Like I'm taking one of my money off it as well on top of that. That's like a whole other layer. And it's like like, how do you promote that? And how do you make
Mhm.
you yourself seem very accessible, whilst also not wanting to be accessible to everybody because you don't have the time to be. You know,
Yes.
it's a huge balance. But yeah, anyway, we'll get into that later. But it's a huge balance. Okay, so do you think that society values art and creative careers in general?
I had a really interesting thought about that. I wrote it down. Because when you bring in the idea of society into into the creative field, you're ultimately going to be influenced by the time you live in. Society is going to view creativity and the production of art in a different way. So when I first read the question and thought about it, I was like, you know, when you bring up the year 1945, I don't think about art. I could not tell you a famous painting that was created in 1945. Um, and so when you ask the question, how does society feel about art and creativity? It depends on where you are, what you're involved in, what kind of society you're in to begin with. Like for me, using the university atmosphere as a great example, creativity and art is everything. That was my society. Once I left that, I'm working at coffee shops, and occasionally you'll meet somebody who wants to have genuine conversation about it, or they want to talk about the art on the walls, or they want to talk about what you do. And and in that way, I feel like creativity and art in society is heavily dependent on whether or not people are willing to give it time and value. I mean, you could argue that people are always giving it time and value. They are. But on the larger scale of things, society wants to use art for its own purposes to a certain extent. And that can be good or bad. It is completely neutral statement. Like there are a couple of programs, especially here in the Southwest, Phoenix to be specific. And I like to keep my thumb on what's happening, like what are they offering, like what kind of shows are going up, like what kind of performances are we putting grants towards and stuff like that, because it's important. And those are the things that I feel like society at large is going to be interested in, is can art tell my story, my universal story? My experience, can it be translated into something more, something bigger? And it can be good or bad. It can be used for political means. It can be used for clout. And sometimes it's really authentic and really beautiful. Down in Phoenix, you get lots of murals that are focused on Latin communities and indigenous communities, and they're beautiful and they're fascinating. That's what society cares about, because that's who makes up that society. So I think I think society and culture care about art and creativity to a certain extent, because we live such complicated lives, especially in the modern era. And, that's not to romanticize the past. The past was also complicated, but especially in regards to things like social media, how readily we're able to communicate or just produce something. There are means and ways of doing things that couldn't be imagined 100 years ago. I mean, mind blowing exchanges of information on a global scale. It's awesome. And I think as we progress, that whole global community thing is going to have to round itself out and become something new and different, because right now I think society views art as kind of a means to an end, especially if you are a modern artist with an Instagram account and a Patreon and a YouTube channel and all this other stuff to try and direct traffic to yourself. So I feel like it often just presents itself as another business opportunity, instead of an authentic creative experience, which is, what it should be. Society is a mixed bag, neither good nor bad, but definitely complicated.
So, but how do you think that, or do you think that it's important for artists to just be kind of like the creative, kind of like the creative individual? Like, do you think that business is always going to be play a part in like an artist's journey if they want to make money being an artist?
If you want to make money being an artist, absolutely.
Because you can't really
Because
escape it.
yeah, not at all. Like it was a factor in my decision in becoming an artist from a young age. It's, oh cool, you want to be a starving artist. That's really cute, kid.
Hmm.
Because the practical effects of choosing a creative career um ultimately fans out into everything you do, whether or not you can afford healthcare, whether or not you can go out to eat
Yeah,
tonight.
yeah.
Um, I think it depends on what you're willing to do. And this is, I wouldn't tell anybody to go out and do this, but if you want to be like Vincent, if you want to be like Van Gogh or Gauguin, you are going to really do some damage on yourself.
Hmm.
Like, and those are very extreme examples, obviously. Um, for the most part, as far as I remember, both of them as artists more or less threw monetary gain to the wayside.
Yeah.
Vincent, of course, had a very complex experience. He wanted to sell his artwork. Didn't happen. And the result was somebody who was um both of them, at least from my perspective, I'm not an art historian, so please nobody grade me. From my perspective, it's a very torturous existence when you divorce the practical um, from the eccentric creative parts of life, because it's like I heard somebody say recently, money in and of itself is not evil. Um, Everything is a tool, and it carries the connotations and the perspective that you give it. Um, as an artist, if you monetize your work or you find a way to supply yourself with some kind of income stream, you have money to make more art.
Hmm.
You have money to take time off to go to a retreat somewhere in France. You can do all kinds of things. That practical side helps feed the creative side, the side that is definitely not as practical. I think I think divorcing the two is a very dangerous path, um, and it can lead to some crazy results. But I hate to see a world of artists who are just so busy monetizing their work that it's not fun anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Because that's a slippery slope. It's kind of it's like it's a sliding scale. Because like you like, do you want to be like super commercial and become like a factory, and then you're just pumping out work, but it has no personality to it and it has no meaning or heart? Or do you want to be the
Mm-hmm.
artist who sits there and labors over their work and creates, beautiful, amazing, personal images, but then
Mm-hmm.
nobody's buying them? It's like, where do
Yeah.
you sit on that scale? Where are you happy to sit on that scale? And as you said earlier, like choosing where you sit on that scale, it's not just tied to that scale, but choosing where you sit on that scale will kind of determine how you live your life. And then it will
Mm-hmm.
determine the lifestyle you have. And then it will determine, finances and, can you afford a car and can you afford a holiday and can you afford kids? It kind of
Yeah.
it really just feeds into that because a lot of artists I know just have really rich husbands. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or they have husbands who work, or partners, not necessarily just husbands, many husbands, but partners who work like a good paying job and they can just sit at home and make art. Not that that art is less valid, but
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like with art, from some people I've spoken to, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Like not everything is as it seems
Yes.
online, you know.
Yeah.
So I definitely would encourage people generally just to. to not feel like they're not doing enough, because you're only doing enough as much as you can do yourself with the resources you have. It's so easy to look at everybody else and be like, oh, they've got a new show, or they've got, all these materials, they've got a big airy studio. But it's like
Mhm.
that's because that's where they're at in life. You are
Mhm.
not at that place. Work
Yeah.
with what you have, and then maybe you'll get that if that's your ambition, but that doesn't have to be your ambition. Like I always
Mhm.
say to people, like, don't live somebody else's dream, like focus on your own, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're gonna get stuck chasing something that you don't even want. And then when you realize you don't want it, you're gonna have wasted time realizing that you could have actually done something with that time that would have
Mhm.
propelled you in a different direction. I don't know. I'm just rambling 'cause I'm tired, but I don't know. I kind of feel like I don't know. I told so many artists who just seem so lost, and it makes me
Mhm.
sad because it's just like it's not easy, but it's also kind of what you signed up for. Not in a rude way, but like you didn't sign up for something secure. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like you have to figure
Exactly.
out, you have to really figure out again, like going back to what I just said, like, that sliding scale, like where do you fit on that sliding scale, and how is that going to affect every decision you make?
Yeah.
That's my TED
Yeah.
talk over.
No, no. It's that is a huge facet of learning how to just live as an artist
Mm,
without letting either your physical needs fall by the wayside or your creative needs die out. Um, you're always going to have to you've got, let's see, two resources, three resources. You've got time, and you've got money. Um, and there's one more, and I can't remember because I'm always focused on time and money, unfortunately. But you have to trade one for the other. If you don't have money, you have to spend time. If you don't have time, you have to spend money. If your starter goes out on your car and you can't fix it yourself, you lack the skills and the time, you're going to have to pony up. And
mm,
so, what's something I've noticed that I think I always, in a weird way, I think I always saw it coming. Choosing an artistic career, I was always going to be spending more time to take care of myself and the things that I need. I'm going to make stuff myself. I'm going to salvage things because my money is coming from a weird, shaky resource that supplies me in fits and spurts. And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's terrible. And you have to be willing to compensate for those terrible times, even when it's already good. Um, I I kind of got it easy. My dad was a financial advisor, and so I
mm.
learned a lot of healthy monetary practices from him anyway. Um, he set a really wonderful examples of how to do the things that you care about without making idiotic decisions. You
Yeah,
don't have to make poor decisions. You can. It's an
yeah,
option. Nobody's going to tell you not to, but you don't have to. You can do what you love without suffering, but you have to take the right steps. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a learned skill.
So it's funny you should say time and money, because I had this exact conversation with somebody yesterday on Instagram. Because I
Mhm.
always say time, space, and money. I feel like you can't have all three of those in the same moment in time unless you're very, very rich. I think you
Yeah.
have to sacrifice one of those. And the
Mhm.
problem is that to be a quote unquote successful artist, you need all three. And it's kind of
Mhm.
like, how do you get to a point in your life where you have the time, the space, and the money to create? Because having the motivation to create is great, but having the means is a different matter entirely.
Mhm.
Just because you
Mhm.
have the best ideas ever, you may not have the materials. And the
Yeah.
opposite way around, you may have the materials, but may not have the motivation. It's like there's just so many like facets of what you need to have in order to be an artist, let alone just creating the work. That's not even getting into creating the work, That's just the
Yeah.
mental side of being an artist and being like, oh, actually, I want to create something. It's like, well, where do you
Mhm.
start? It's it's actually that's a question I didn't even ask on this list, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is like, what kind of skills do you need to be an artist?
Um, not very many. And that's not to say that it isn't still a skillful thing to do. Like
Hmm.
it's really weird. To be an artist, I think you really need to maintain and feed into that skill of that deep creative play that is so essential to making anything. Like I've got a really good friend who she can't draw. Like I don't think she can. She can draw a little bit, but she's not trained.
Hmm.
She's not going around doing portraits or anything like that. But she, um, she'll put collages together. She will find materials that she likes and just let herself mess around with it. And I honestly think that's one of the only skills that you need as an artist. There are other things that are going to make a lifestyle as a creative much easier. I have a much easier time being able to do a commission because I took several drawing classes and I practice in my sketchbook every other day. You know, there are things that will make your life easier, but the only requirement is the willingness to experiment, you know, that
Yeah,
that whole creative mindset that feeds into everything else and makes you more willing to spend the time and the effort and the money to
absolutely.
do anything in the first place. So yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense.
you just got to show up.
I mean, that's true. That's half. Yeah, that's half the battle, I guess.
No.
So you're a full-time artist. At what point were you able to make the leap into being a full-time artist? Like, what point did you know this is the moment I need to do it?
Um, so it was the moment when I kind of didn't have a choice anymore.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so the last few years have been, all centered around 2020, because prior to 2020, we didn't know what that year was going to look like.
absolutely.
So in 2019, I married my husband, and we just kind of decided to move to Arizona. He had an aunt and an uncle who lived in Phoenix, and I was ready to leave Mississippi, and so was he. It was just time. And they say that, when you get married, it's good to move away from family because you rely on each other and not your society of people that you have for
Yeah,
years. You have to learn this
it
new relationship.
depends on the couple. Yeah.
Um, I mean, absolutely. But for us, it was definitely the right decision. Um, so we took off, and it was a weird, rocky few years. We sublet a room from a couple, and made new friends and learned how to live in the 115-degree environment that is Phoenix. Do not recommend. It's a lot. It's a beautiful place. The Sonoran Desert is an experience, but you cannot go outside without being prepared. It's crazy. So, massive changes going from a verdant, very easy to live in environment full of people that we know to a Martian landscape full of strangers. And so, I was working in a coffee shop and, doing commissions and the odd illustration job and stuff like that. And it was not fun. It was very difficult. It was, I don't want to say the entire experience was depressing because it wasn't. There were a lot of really beautiful, fun things in that difficult time. But, we had just moved. Um, we both had weird income streams, and 2020 kicked in. And, we're a couple of young idiots. We're not paying attention to the housing market. We just know that we have enough money saved up for a down payment and we can potentially buy a house. And so we're just like, all right, let's go for it. Let's see what we can find. Let's see what the process looks like. Yay, paperwork. Oh, it was rough. We ended up finding a house, and you know, far north of Phoenix. We're actually like kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to describe to people where we are. We are literally in the middle of Arizona. It is wilderness, and it's
Wow.
beautiful, and it's unique, and it's strange, and I love it. You go from spending your entire life living under canopies of trees, being inspired by that, loving that, feeding on that, and you've never seen a horizon consistently all the way around you before. So there's mountain ranges, and it's awesome. So we said yes to it. Bought this house in the middle of nowhere, and because it's in the middle of nowhere, we both were already working remotely because of COVID. It was sort of like either you can keep taking online commissions, you can keep doing lame logos that you're not passionate about for people that you would never meet,
Hmm.
or you can live hard for a few years and go all in on your art practice. And, my husband was incredibly supportive. He was like, I want you to do what you care about, because if you're spending your time and all of your effort on something that means something, is worth existing around, is worth having be a part of you. And, what we tell each other, especially in the beginning, is what you're doing, putting good things into the world. Is the work that you're doing, like, is it good? Is it, I don't want to use the word wholesome, but like, does it have meat to it? And, doing logos had no meat in it for me. It was just work. And so, it was terrifying, but in the middle of all of this chaos and moving and massive life changes, it was just sort of like, either you can commit, or you can throw it away, because there's a chance that you'll never come back to it. I like to think I'm a really practical person. I, there's another lifetime somewhere where I'm like a nurse practitioner, like very practical, very down to earth. I can fix things. I know how these things work. It's all in the textbook, because that would have been a really safe, reasonable job to choose. But, and this isn't to play up the importance of having an artistic gift, but I had something that was weird and that I could do that it seemed like a lot of people couldn't. So I was like, maybe I should give this a shot, because maybe it's actually worth something beyond myself. So yeah, 2021, I bit the bullet and redesigned a website for the third time, I think, and started trying to post more regularly to Instagram. And it seems to be sticking. It's terrifying when you terrifying in a good way, when you spend so much time and effort on something and you actually start to see growth. You actually start to see what you've wanted to see for years. It's like waiting on a date palm to give you fruit. And all of a sudden you walk outside one summer waiting to be disappointed, and it's laden with all kinds of goodies. And it's terrifying. It's like, I didn't know this could happen. But I had an opportunity to tend the garden, and I took it. And it hasn't been easy. It's not a dream come true most days. But on the days when it is, it's, I think to myself, if I died tomorrow, I'd be okay with this. I did something I cared about, which is a massive blessing that so many people don't get to do. So yeah, 2020 pushed me into it, and I live in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't want to work anywhere else. So so I 24/7 in my house. So it's great.
Let's get into your work, because that's what we're here to talk about. So can you describe your work for those who may not have seen it?
Describe it. See, I came up with something relatively succinct. So obviously, the imagery I'm working with right now is werewolves. They've gotten a lot of nicknames based on their format. I've had one person call them square wolves, somebody else called them captive canids, and I can't remember if I came up with this or if somebody else did, but bound beasties. But square wolves is definitely a favorite of mine. Somebody said it, and I was like, I'm an idiot to have not thought of this. So yeah, it's basically. So I should probably make a bit of a distinction. Everybody calls them werewolves because it's what they look like. It's what it reads as. It's a human body with a werewolf's head, face type thing, canine, whatever. But the original idea for the illustration was, I mean, I like werewolves anyway. Everybody does. Wolves are cool. It's whatever. And I had to be a nerd about it. It couldn't just be a normal werewolf. I wanted to research werewolf folklore and the origins of the concept of a werewolf and stuff like that. And so I found this concept of dog-headed people, kind of cephalai, the Greek, depending on whether you spell it with with a K or with a C. It could be cynocephali, but I like Kino better because I think the K on the word visually looks cooler. I don't know. It feels like it's closer to the Greek lettering. But anyway, but dog-headed people, not necessarily werewolves, not a sudden transformation into a monster. They're really a representation of this old world concept of people who literally had dog heads, and they growled and they barked, and it was an entire society of people. Like they wore clothing, and they, did business with traders and stuff like that. It was the weirdest thing I've ever read. I was like, why would you ever think this exists? Who comes up with this? Marco Polo, that's who, for whatever reason. And so I really liked this idea of, instead of being a werewolf and transforming into something terrible once a month, and just the idea of the monster, it's this idea of existing in a constant state of otherness, of strangeness, constant strangeness. So it's these humanoid forms with dog heads, which is part of what fed into the evolution of the imagery, was this kind of esoteric old world flavor. I didn't pull from any one visual vocabulary from any one society throughout history. It was just sort of a synthesis of how do people process these forms in their simplest distillation. So, you've got a lot of things I've noticed that I wasn't really paying attention to as far as style goes. You've got this kind of cephali form, obviously a human being with something strange going on, but the interpretation of the musculature and the hair and these really dramatic dog faces, I wanted to pull from, old manuscript illustrations and, New World imagery from South America, and sort of the stoic Egyptian, carving, very, very stoic, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a pose that is evocative but timeless. You see these carvings of Egyptian kings, and they are stiff as a board, but they're timeless. And that was what they were going for. They didn't want a photorealistic representation of their leader. They wanted this eternal imagery that would stand guard. So a little bit of that, a little bit of Eastern visual influences. You get these rounded squares and things like that, and I love that shape because I think it makes sense. I think it's a very human shape because we like boxes. We like containment systems. We really do. And so when you put a rounded edge on that, when you simplify the form, and the color, which is another aspect of the style that I'm still working on, limited color palette, lots of burnt umber, lots of ultramarine blue in the shadows and things like that. And then, for whatever reason, I love hot pink. Obviously, I don't want my entire world to be hot pink, but it is such a joyful, absolutely delightful color. I mean, if happiness was a color, it would probably be hot pink because it's just so bombastic. So you've got that, but you've also got eerie, out of place greens and cool colors being pulled from the shadows, because I love difficult to convey lighting. And so this human form and a little bit of the softness and the animal shape in the face just sort of at this point serves as a way to explore those colors, that sort of liminal twilight, sunset, sunrise lighting that happens over large landscapes. Just where the entire color scheme came from was I was just so obsessed with the colors of the sunset outside my window, and how close and intimate the entire world started to feel once the sun was near the horizon, because the colors are just mind-blowingly beautiful when you've got this much space to see them in the Southwest. So you know, I on that note, I'm not sure that I would have created these if I hadn't moved to the Southwest at all, because I never would have experienced a landscape like this, especially long term when you're living in it. It's different than going on vacation and going like, oh, I really like I like this, and this. But if you're not immersed in it to a certain extent, it's hard to really synthesize something from it. At least it is for me because I'm very impatient. And I wouldn't otherwise revisit it if I'd just come for a week in the summer and left. But not a very like small, distinct description of what my work looks like. But there's not a whole lot of ways to put it. It's some people with wolf heads in boxes with the same colors over and over again because I'm a creature of habit.
What's really interesting that you said in terms of like your inspirations, in terms of like, like Egyptian tombs, for instance, carvings and Egyptian tombs. And then you also said like even like Chinese vases. And like when you
Mhm,
said that, it's kind of like that makes a lot of sense looking at your work. It's kind of because the images are quite flat.
mhm,
Like they're not necessarily particularly like three-dimensional, but then they could be like it's interesting. They could be like printed, but then they could also be like painted, but they can also be like stenciled. It kind of
mhm.
the way in which you've created them, the style you have is quite universal amongst different kind of types of medium. And because obviously you use mixed media, which is the next question, in terms of like the things like graphite, colored pencils, watercolor, like what led you to creating a mixed media artwork?
Um, I think I just gave myself permission to experiment one day because I had all of these different mediums in my tool belt already. I mean, I'm not a master by any means. I have not been alive long enough to master anything. Um, but I understood the properties of my materials well enough that I finally sort of felt comfortable
Hmm.
getting weird with it and using things in ways that I didn't before, because kind of at a crossroads. It was gosh, almost a year ago. It was October of last year. I a lot of things were changing, a lot of things were difficult, and it's been a way of life for me since I was very small. But if I'm experiencing something that I don't know how to process, I don't necessarily dissociate
Hmm.
so much as I do disappear into a project, or I let myself, you know, make up a story and, do a little bit of writing or do a little bit of doodling. And so, as a way to sort of deal with things that I couldn't change and things that I couldn't control, I gave myself something to sort of play with, to invest in. And so I did a drawing of an actual werewolf, somebody who's like transforming into a monster, and just played around with totally different techniques and trying to use colored pencils in ways that I hadn't before. Because initially I picked them up and I was trying to use them like graphite, very, very slow, careful rendering process on extremely smooth, Bristol illustration paper and stuff like that. Totally different process. Um, but I loved the depth that I could get out of taking the technique that I had acquired through using graphite pencils and applying it to something with actual color involved. And, the first couple pieces I did that with were a hot mess because, when you first try something, it's like there's so
Yeah.
much going on here. There's so many colors, and I don't know how to coordinate everything because I'm so busy just experiencing like this brand new medium in a brand new way. And once I got that out of my system, it was a lot easier to take the colored pencils and combine them with something I'd done my whole life, watercolor. So it was just it was a happy accident for sure. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just wanted to play one day.
That's cool though. I think that's it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of the idea of like you just need to experiment and kind of just, you know, let kind of your preconceived notions of what it is that you want to create, like kind of put them to one side and then just try something new. Because then there, like if you don't try new stuff, you're gonna become bored with your own work. And actually, there's a question for later, but I'm gonna ask you now. Like, how do you make sure that you wait, should I ask this question now or should I ask this question later? I'll ask the question later. As you can tell, like these never go in the order because I'm just like, let me just do this. No, let me do that. Um, I give myself way more time editing because I'm going to have to call this bit out that I'm rambling about. Um, yeah, okay. The next logical question to ask would be like, so are there any particular mediums that you would like to explore, or that you don't already use that you kind of feel like, oh, actually, I might want to try this?
Yeah, I mean, starting small, I would really like to get more into gouache and oil pastels.
Hmm.
Um, so mediums in general that are going to deliver a whole lot of pigment in very like large quantities of pigment. So like I see people in videos using oil pastels that are like as big around as my fingers and just like chunks of pigment, and I'm like, that's what I need to use because the bigger these pieces get, the more I really don't want to spend the next 3 weeks trying to add color and value with little bitty colored pencils. I'm going to have to, you know, literally find bigger materials to let me do the things that I want to do. So definitely gouache, definitely oil pastel, which are both like I understand them in principle, but I've never used either one extensively. So it's going to be really messy for a while, but
Yeah,
it'll pay off. And I actually really want to investigate three-dimensional mediums to create like bas relief pieces of one of the wolves, pretty large format. But I've never done that either, so I'm probably gonna have to play around and experiment with things like paper mache and plaster Paris before I invest in anything too serious. It'd be really cool to do metalworking and things like that. I just, when you were talking about the versatility of these things, like, you know, it could be painted, it could be drawn, it could be stamped, it could be pressed, anything. That's kind of what I like so much about it is it translates to anywhere. Somebody could use a stencil and tag a train car with it,
hmm, yeah,
and and I like that. I've never made anything that felt um, fluid, felt really universal and transmissible. Because at the end of the day, that's really what I want the art that I make to be, and it's what I want it to do. I want it to communicate, and I want it to walk that line between I can digest this easily and turn it into a sticker or a t-shirt, but it's also visceral and strange and makes me a little uncomfortable and is still there's it's easy to digest, but it has a weird flavor.
yeah.
And I want to find a way to walk that line as effectively and authentically as possible. You know, I still really want to. I'd like to consider myself a fine artist, and I think a lot of that is going to be um, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to hinge on my process, how I create, why I create, do I have a point to my creation? There's a whole world of different definitions around what it means to be a fine artist, and not even gonna touch that. Um, but I would like the mediums that I use and the formats that I put my imagery into to be impactful. So bigger would be better, and bolder would be better. And those are both things that I hate, which is ironic.
So it's interesting because I actually didn't realize until I looked, obviously did more research, is how big your images are.
Yes,
And I looked at,
they're
I saw a reel or an Instagram video of you like working on the eye, and I was like, wait a minute, these are huge. These are really big. Can you talk a bit about the scale of the work and why create work at that scale?
yeah. So let's see. I've got little bitty pieces of paper that I keep on my desk.
That's so cool.
So 5 by 7, I think is how
Yeah,
big
that's
this
roughly,
is.
yeah, roughly about 5 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, easy to get an idea out on a paper this size. But so I hate thumbnails.
Hmm.
I think I said one time that uh, thumbnails use up all the good creative juice, so don't do thumbnails. But I would never tell somebody not to use thumbnails because you never know when it could be helpful. And all of my teachers would be angry at me for not doing thumbnails, at least to a certain extent. They'd be disappointed. Let's see, this really big piece. Here we go. this is how large things are getting.
Wow, that's
So
insane.
I think this is 18 by 24, something like
Yeah,
that. Um, and I chronically hate pieces this size because as you can see, it takes up a lot of space and it's very overwhelming. And it's just a different animal. I was talking about it with my husband, trying to translate what I'm creating at 6 by 8, 5 by 7 scale into something that is bigger than my torso.
mm.
You've got to consider things like what did he call it? Color scaling. But basically, the bigger something gets, you're gonna end up having to treat your color palette slightly differently. Um, just to like show the world how big of nerds we are. So he likes to paint miniatures, right?
Okay.
So like, anything from like airplanes to fantasy stuff, Warhammer. So, there's like a rack of paints and like,
Wow.
Kolinsky sable little brushes and stuff like that. And there's a real science to taking um, what looks like a reasonable color palette for that character and applying it to something that is the size of your thumb. Um, you know, Realistically, you might paint an orc in a lot of olive drab and lots of neutral tones and things like that because that makes sense. That is what that character would wear. It's what he would do. But you get it down to the size of your thumb, and all of a sudden, those colors look like mud.
Mm.
So I'm having to learn how to do it in the reverse. Take colors that I know work at small scale and find the balance in applying them to something much, much bigger. Um, and it's really weird. It's really hard, and I know I'm gonna have a few large scale pieces that will be duds. Ultimately, I
Yeah,
won't
of
be
course.
happy with them, but you have to eat paper sometimes.
It's
So
the only way you're going to learn. It's the only way you're going to learn. Otherwise, you're not going to know and you'll have no idea.
exactly, yeah, yeah. So
But you prefer working smaller.
um, yes. Uh, for different reasons from working big. I really enjoy working large because I like the impact that size has. I like um, I like how consuming a large piece is. Um, I'm thinking of a really good artistic reference right now. Barnett Newman, who does the massive monochrome canvases with these disturbing lines through them. If I'm remembering that correctly, I really hope I am. Um, but they are so big that if it wasn't in a gallery room by itself, it would eat you. That size, that scale is just so powerful. It's like when you realize how large a cloud is or how many feet tall a pine tree really is. They're 100 feet plus. It's ridiculous. But you don't know that until you experience it. So I really want to do large scale because I think large scale is in a lot of ways ultimately better for the experience of artwork. Um, you should do a billion of something and you should try to do it really big sometimes. It's sort of like stretching. You've got to reach your toes every now and then. But I definitely prefer small scale because I can pump out tons of ideas and I can see them all the way through. Like, I can qualify this 5 by 7 as a finished piece because it was petite enough for me to see this specific process on this specific paper all the way through. So I like small scale because I really just want to be an idea factory most weeks. But I'm trying to change that. I've got at least one professor who would commend my efforts and would tell me that I should have been doing it a lot sooner, which is understandable. He's totally right.
I do wonder though if you think that some artists create bigger work just because it's like more showy.
hmm
'Cause I think
hmm
that's one of the problems that having a big canvas is great, or having a big image or a big piece of paper to work on is great, but you then have to think about how you're going to fill that. And it's like it kind of it almost becomes its own problem in a way.
hmm
Its own problem in a way because like you have to then figure out, like it kind of opens the question of like space and images and like, what is what's appropriate, and also like kind of how you can utilize the canvas or paper or space you have to create this work.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes in some cases with a more abstract work, maybe, so if that's going to get me into trouble saying that, but I feel like people just seem to work big because it seems like it's a better idea when really you could have probably just did that half the size.
Yeah,
I think
yeah. Like the point of what you just made was just to make big, and like
yeah,
that's what it's riding on essentially.
yes, and then you wonder why it doesn't sell because it's like 100 by 100 and nobody has the space in the house for that. You kind of can't
Right.
wonder why. Just an observation, from a casual observation from wandering around
Just a
art
thought.
fairs for a few years.
Yeah.
It's I love the thing is like I always love seeing scales of work in person because the scale of
Mm,
work is really important. Obviously, bigger work attracts your attention a lot more easier. But then I've personally always found it's the smaller images that actually have the most detail and contain the most, in my opinion, craftsmanship because you have
mhm,
to spend time creating something. Like with a bigger image, you can be a lot looser. So details don't have to be perfect. But with a
mhm,
smaller image, kind of details have to be crisp, otherwise they're going to be very noticeable if they're wrong. So I have
mhm,
every respect to artists who do work on both scales and everything in between. Because I feel like as an artist you should always
mhm.
work in different scales because it's can makes your work more accessible.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel like people don't really think about like the artists who create smaller work. Like there's an artist called Jen Orpin. Her work is gorgeous.
Mm.
And I had the chance to go and see it in Manchester when I was in Manchester. I did walked into a random gallery, happened to be on the wall. What a great experience when you know an artist's work and you look at it in real life. Wasn't even planning to.
Yeah.
So nice, but they're tiny, and I had no idea they were so tiny. And it
Mhm.
kind of made her work even better. So I was like,
Yeah.
this is so much more skilled to be able to
Mhm.
create this on such a small scale. So it's just like the scale of work is everything. I think it's super important.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Then I also think it depends on if people see the work in person, because I think that's also an issue we have with society, is that
Oh,
90%
massive.
of the time people see stuff online. And
Mhm,
like I did with your work, you have no idea of how big that is. You have no idea the concept. Even through a video, yeah, you see it, but does it register in your mind how big that really is? How many
mhm.
hours that artist has spent on that piece of work? Like it's it can like actually, and how do you actually, I guess, yeah, how do you kind of make sure that the viewer understands like the scale of your work or make sure how much effort goes into creating your work?
So, I mean, for me personally,
Yeah.
um, especially on an online platform, um, Instagram is probably my main online presence right now, because it's very easy to just spit content into and maintain a presence and stuff like that, which is good and bad.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, having processed videos that are in real time because it's along that line of thinking, you can just spit content into this program. People will see it, people will automatically like it. The more they like it, the more people will show up, the more successful, in large air quotes, you are. Um, but it's really quite frustrating. In an online context, it is doable but not fun to give people real-time videos of how slow you have to work,
yeah.
how long it takes to draw this one line to describe a leg on a piece of paper, um, how many times I have to resharpen a pencil just to complete that one line. Um, and that I feel like when it comes to the difficulty, the time sink, the personal investment in the creative process, I just cannot find a really good way of presenting that online. You can post YouTube videos, but the thing about art, and maybe I'm a little old fashioned, but I just feel like you can't consume it properly without seeing something in person.
Mm,
That's why I found it's really important to have a physical presence, to do markets every now and then, to do group shows, to hang your stuff in a cafe, because that physical interaction is the at least to me is one of the only ways that a viewer can be as almost as intimate as you were in the process of making it. You were present for this thing to come into existence. And it only makes sense for, somebody that you want to see it and appreciate it, enjoy it, understand it, to actually have a physical interaction of standing in front of it or touching it or, any of that stuff, understanding the textures of the paper and, I just don't know how we can get away from doing that, you know? In a funny way, art is always going to be frustratingly local, There's a lot of exhibitions I would love to go see, but they're on the other side of the world. They're somewhere in Dusseldorf. I cannot just pick up and go there.
Yeah.
But I know that it's not going to be the same as standing in front of that painting, as looking at it online. It's just I think the physicality is part of the humanity behind it, and we're never going to get away from that unless we all decide to be holograms. I don't think that's going to work though. Too many bugs.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
That concludes the first part of my conversation with Phelan Harris. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me a message at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or get in touch via social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast can be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of those platforms to help spread the word. Also, don't forget to check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. If you'd like to support the platform further, we also have a Patreon page. Tiers start from £1, and more information can be found over at patreon.com/theflyingfruitbowl. If monthly donations are not your thing, we also have a PayPal for one-time donations. I'll include a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to the episode today. Until next time, folks, please stay safe.